Okay, read aloud. Continues. Where we left off. I don't even know where we left off. Oh, he was a bird still. And he had been turned into a goose. So he was a different type of bird. And then he got changed into a goose. So now he's kind of in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of geese. Long before the sun came, they were making ready for flight. Family parties of the previous year's breeding were coming together in batches, and these batches themselves inclined to join with others, possibly under the command of their grandfather, or else a great-grandfather, or else some noted leader in the host. When the drafts were complete, there came a faint tone of excitement to their speech. They began moving their heads from side to side in jerks. Then, turning into the wind, suddenly they would all be in the air together, 14 or 40 at a time, with wide wings scooping the blackness and a cry of triumph in their throats. They would wheel around, climbing rapidly, and be gone from sight. 20 yards up, they were invisible in the dark. The earlier departures were not vocal. They were inclined to be taciturn before the sun came, only making occasional remarks or crying their single warning note if danger threatened. Then, at the warning, they would all rise vertically to the sky. The wart began to feel an uneasiness himself. The din squadrons about him, setting on mute minute by minute, infected him with a tendency. He became restless to embrace the example, but he was shy. Perhaps their family groups, he thought, would resent his intrusion. Yet he wanted not to be lonely. He wanted to join in, and to enjoy the exercise of a morning flight, which was so evidently a pleasure. They had a comradeship, free discipline, and joie de vivre. When the goose next to the boy spread his wings and leapt, he did so automatically. Some 8 of the nearby had been jerking their bills, which had imitated as if they were catching, and now, with these same 8, he found himself on pinion in the horizon air. The moment that he had left the earth, the wind had vanished. Its restlessness and brutality had dropped away as if cut by a knife. He was in it and at peace. The 8 geese spread out in the line astern, evenly spaced with him behind. They made for the east, where the poor lights had been, and now before them the sun began to rise. A crack of orange vermilion broke the cloud bank far beyond the land. The glory spread, the salt marsh growing visible below. He saw it like a featureless moor or bogland which had become maritime by accident, its heather still looking like heather, having mated with the seaweed until it was salt, wet heather with slippery fronds. The burns which should have been run through the moorland were of seawater of bluish mud. There were long nets here and there erected on poles into which unwary geese might fly. These, he now guessed, had been the occasions for which the warning notes came. 2 or 3 winged hung in one of them, and one far away to the eastward. A fly-like man was plodding over the sob in tiny persistence to collect his bag. The sun, as it rose, tinged the quicksilver of the creeks and the gleaming slime itself with flame. The curfew, who had been piping their mournful paints since long before the flight, flew now from weed bank to weed bank. The winged, who had slept on water, came whistling their double notes like whistles from a Christmas cracker. The mallard toiled from land against the wind. The redshank scuttled and prodded like mice. A cloud of tiny dunlin, more compact than starlings, turned in the air with the noise of a train, and the guard of crows rose from the pine trees and the dunes with merry cheers. Shorebirds of every sort populated the tide line, filling it with business and beauty. The sea dawn and the mastery ordered flight were such intense beauty that the boy was moved to sing. He wanted to cry a chorus to life, and since 1,000 geese were on the wings about him, he had not long to wait. The lines of these creatures, wavering like smoke upon the sky as they breasted the sunrise, were all at once in music and in laughter. Each squadron of them was in a different voice, some larking, some triumphant, some in sentiment or glee. He was in a coarse field, in daylight, and his companions of the flight were grazing around him, plucking the grass with the sideways wrenches of their soft, small bills, bending their necks into abrupt loops, unlike graceful curves of the swan. Always, as they fed, one of their numbers was on guard. Its head erect and snake-like, they had mated during the winter months or else previous winters, so that they tended to feed in pairs within the family and squadron. The young female, his neighbor of the mud flats, was in her first year. She kept an intelligent eye upon him. The boy, watching her cautiously, noted her plump, compact frame and a set of neat furrows on her neck. These furrows, he saw out of the corner of his eye, were caused by a difference in the feathering. The feather was concave, which separated them from one another, making a texture of ridges which he considered graceful. Presently, the young goose gave a shove with her bill, and she had been acting sentry. "You next," she said. She lowered her head without waiting for an answer, and then began to graze in the same movement. Her feeding took her from his side. He stood sentry. He did not know what he was watching for, nor could he see any enemy, except for the tussocks and his nibbling mates. But he was not sorry to be a trusted sentinel for them. "What are you doing?" she asked, passing him after half an hour. "I was on guard." "Go on with you," she said with a giggle. "Or should it be a gaggle? You are silly." "Why?" "You know." "Honestly," he said, "I don't. Am I doing it wrong? I don't understand." "Peck the next one. You have been on it for twice your time at least." He did as she told him, at which the grazer next to them took over, and then he walked along the feed beside her. They nibbled, noting one another out of a beady eye. "You think I'm stupid," he said shyly, confessing the secret of his real species for the first time to an animal. "But it's because I'm not a goose. I was born as a human. This is my first flight, really." She was mildly surprised. It is unusual," she said. "The humans generally try the swans. The last lot that we had were children of the Lyre. However, I suppose that we're all answerforms together." "I have heard of the children of Lyre." They didn't enjoy it. They were hopelessly nationalistic and religious. Anyways, hanging about one of the chapels in Ireland. You could say that they hardly noticed the other swans at all. "I'm enjoying it." "I thought you were. What were you sent for?" "To learn my education." They grazed in silence until his own words reminded him of something that he had wanted to ask. "The sentries," he asked. "Are we at war?" She didn't understand the word. "War? Are we fighting people?" "Fighting?" she asked doubtfully. "The men fight sometimes about their wives and that. Of course there is no bloodshed, but only scuffling. To find the better man. Is that what you mean?" "No, I mean fighting against armies and against the other geese, for instance." She was amused. "How ridiculous. You meet a lot of geese all scuffling at the same time? It would be too fun to watch." Her tone surprised him, for his heart was still a kind of one for being a boy. "Fun to watch them kill each other?" "To kill each other? An army of geese to kill each other?" She began to understand this idea slowly and doubtfully, and an expression of distaste came over her face. When it had sunk in, she left him. She went away to another part of the field in silence. He followed, but she turned her back. Moving around to get a glimpse of her eyes, he was startled by the dislike, a look as if he had made some obscene suggestion. He said lamely, "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "Leave talking about it." "I'm sorry." Later he added with annoyance, "A person can ask, I suppose. It seems a natural question with the centuries." But she was thoroughly angry. "Will you stop about it at once? What a horrible mind you must have. You have no right to say such things. And of course there are sentries. There are gerfalcons, and the peregrines aren't there. The foxes and the ermines and the humans with their nets. These are natural enemies. But what creature could be so low as to go about it in bands to murder others of its own blood?" "Ants do," he said obstinately, "and I was only trying to learn." She relented with an effort to be good-natured. She wanted to be broad-minded if she could, for she was rather a blue-stocking. "My name is Lilo Layak. You had better call yourself Kiikwa, and then the rest will think that you came from Hungary." "Do you all come here from different places?" "Well, in parties, of course. There are some from here from Siberia, some from Lapland, and I can see one or two from Iceland." "But they don't fight each other for their pasture?" "Dear me, you are silly," she said. There are no boundaries among geese. What are boundaries? Please. Imaginary lines on Earth, I suppose. How can you have boundaries if you fly? Those ants of yours, and the humans too, would have to stop fighting in the end if they took to the air. I like fighting, said the wart. It's nightly. Because you're a baby. There was something magical about the time and space commanded by Merlin, for the wart seemed to be passing many days and nights among the gray people during the one spring night when he had left his body asleep under the bearskin. He grew to be fond of Lilac, in spite of her being a girl. He was always asking her questions about geese. She taught him what she knew with gentle kindness, and the more he learned, the more he came to love her brave, noble, quiet, and intelligent relations. She told him how every white front was an individual, not governed by laws or leaders, except for when they came about spontaneously. They had no kings like Uther, no laws like the bitter Norman ones. They did not own things in common. Any goose who found something nice to eat considered it his own and would peck any other who tried to thieve it. At the same time, no goose claimed any exclusive territorial right in any part of the world except for its nest, and that it was private property. She told him a great deal about migration. The first goose, she said, I suppose, who made the flight from Siberia to Lincolnshire and back again must have brought up a family in Siberia. Then the winter came and it was necessary to find food. He must have grouped his way over at the same route, being the only one who knew it. He will have been followed by his growing family, year after year, their pilot and their admiral. When the time came for him to die, obviously the next best pilots would have to have been his eldest sons, who would have covered the route more often than the others. Naturally, the younger sons and fledglings would have been uncertain about it, and therefore would have been glad to follow somebody who knew. Perhaps among the eldest sons, there would have been some who were famous for being muddle-headed, and the family would have hardly cared to trust them. This, she said, is how an admiral is elected. Perhaps Wink Wink will come to our family in the autumn, and he will say, Excuse me, but by you have any chance a reliable pilot in your lot? Poor old Granddad died at Cloudberry time, and Uncle Oink is in fishing. We were looking for somebody to follow. And then we'll say, Great uncle, we would be delighted to care to hitch up with us, but mind, you cannot take responsibility if things go wrong. Thank you very much, he will say. I am sure your great uncle can be relied on. Do you mind if I mention this matter to the honks who are, I happen to know, in the same difficulty? Not at all. And that, she explained, is how a great uncle became an admiral. It is a good way. Look at his bars, she said respectfully, as they both glanced at the portly patriarch, whose breast was indeed barred with black stripes like the gold rings on an admiral's sleeve. There was a growing excitement among the host. The young geese filtered out outrageously and collected in parties to discuss their pilots. They played games, too, like children excited at the prospect of a party. One of these games was to stand in a circle while the junior ganderers, one after another, walked into the middle of it with their heads stretched out, pretending to hiss. When they were halfway across the circle, they would run past the part, flapping their wings, and this was how to show how brave they were, and what excellent admirals they would make when they grew up. Also, the strange habit of shaking their bills sideways, which was usual before flight, began to grow upon them. The elders and sages who knew the migration routes became uneasy. Also, they kept a wise eye on the cloud formations, summing up the wind and the strength of it and what art it was coming from. The admirals, heavy with responsibility, placed their quarter decks with ponderous tread. Why am I restless? He asked. Why do I have this feeling in my blood? Wait here and see, she said mysteriously. Tomorrow, perhaps, or the day after. When the day came, there was a difference about the salt marsh and the slob. The ant-like man, who had walked out so patiently every sunrise to his long nets with the tides fixed firmly in his hand, had become to make a mistake to them with certain death. Heard far bulge in the sky. He saw no thousands on the mud flats, and there was none in the pasture from which he had come. He was a nice man in his way, for he stood solemnly and took off his leather hat. He did this every spring religiously when the wild geese let him, and every autumn when he saw the first turning gaggle. In a steamer, it takes 2 or 3 days to cross the North Sea. So many hours of slobbering through the vicious water. But for the geese, the sailors of the air, for the angled wedges tearing clouds to tatters, or for the singers of the sky with the gale behind them, 70 miles an hour behind another 70. For those mysterious geographers, 3 miles up, they say, with cumulus for their floor instead of water. For them, it was a different matter. The songs that they sang were full of it.